My mother is coming to see us." The joyful shout of her husband, who burst into the kitchen, unceremoniously pulled Alina out of the meditation-like state in which she always stayed if she cooked her favorite dishes, not in a hurry and knowing that she could sit at the table or, even better, on the sofa in front of the TV. "We'll have it for a week." Valentin looked over his wife's shoulder and, forgetting how much it pissed her off, snatched a piece of canned pineapple from the bowl. The pizza was supposed to be Hawaiian. "I told you not to slice," Angela said and turned away from the rolling pin. "And what do you mean your mom's coming over?" "We are." I know. Reconciliatory raised his hand's husband. "We had a fight on New Year's Eve and mutually swore never to see each other again." "So, you've already made up." "We were at our dacha too." "That's neutral territory." Angela snorted and went back to the test. She dragged it angrily with a rolling pin, so that she tore a circle in the middle. She began to make the pastry, but her fingers trembled treacherously. "So much for a quiet Friday night, sweetheart." "Well, stop getting yourself worked up." Valentin tried to distract his wife by dipping his finger in flour and playfully smearing it on her nose. Earlier, when they were married, she had laughed at that, but now she just wiped her nose with the back of her hand and glared. "Your mom hates me." "What makes you think that?" "She criticizes me. And now you want us to live together for a week, when I have an important project at work and my promotion depends on it." Valentin sighed and sat down on a stool. He folded his arms across his chest, apparently failed to infect his wife with his positive attitude. It turns out that the coach in a funny sweater lied that in the family positive attitude of one person is easily transmitted to a friend and allows you to smooth out, extinguish the emerging conflict situations. And he still gave $50 for his book. Understand me too. She's my mom. She from the suburbs to travel to the clinic, where the examination will be held and treatment. Quite inconvenient, and from us 5 minutes on foot. Angela splashed tomato sauce on the dough and began to spread it with a spatula. She had no doubt that Margaret needed thyroid treatment, but she didn't doubt that she'd chosen the clinic specifically, so that she'd have an excuse to stay at their house for a whole week. What would that be like? Wait, is she going to put Tom in our house too? Then I'll move into a hotel by myself. Tom was a Danish Dane. He had a good nature, but he was cheeky and cheeky. Margaret's favorite, a bottle-fed foundling. He didn't like Angela for some reason. He didn't bite her, but he grumbled if she came close. And also, by some sixth, apparently, since he could find among things exactly those that belonged to her, and then destroy them with his powerful teeth. This is how Angela lost her favorite black boats, a collector's edition, at her mother-in-law's cottage. "Tom is staying with a neighbor," replied the husband. Then he got up and apparently, having decided to drive him to a white frenzy, and otherwise his actions Angela could not explain, began to choose from bowls a piece of everything: boiled chicken, fillet, olives, a pinch of grated cheese. "Why don't we give her our room? We've renovated it, it'll be nice for her." "All right," sighed the girl. "So, at least the mother-in-law will not have in front of her eyes wallpaper in other rooms, because in them were old and floral and rhombic, her dislike and criticized for too blurred contours. And in the bedroom the wallpaper was in stripes, so concise, you can't pick on it. When are we waiting?" "Here we are." Valentine glanced at his watch. "By 9 o'clock. The pizza will be ready just in time." "What? Couldn't you have told me earlier?" "Well, I thought that if I told you when you were in a good mood, you'd take it more calmly." His husband finally looked genuinely guilty. "So, my dear, take and put everything on the pizza and put it in the oven." Angela went to the sink to wash her hands. "And I'll go clean up." The latter was really necessary, because Margaret couldn't be allowed to have anything to reproach her with. And so, they took a rag, a mop and a brush, and went on. "Oh, yes. And don't forget the newspaper, so that there would be no streaks on the mirrors." My mother-in-law had such a point. She read somewhere a scientifically substantiated theory that through dirty mirrors in the house, more actively penetrates negative energy. Angela was sure that the main source of negative energy was on its way to her house, which is no longer a fortress. The doorbell rang just as Valentin looked into the bathroom, where Angela was scrubbing the tiles. Ask if it was time to take out the pizza, because it was getting suspiciously black around the edges and stinking. The mother-in-law, barely crossing the threshold, hugged her daughter-in-law heartily. From both sides, the guest and the owners of the house sprinkled traditional for a family visit speeches. "How did you get here? How are you feeling? How are we for the sake of seeing?" Finally, they sat down at the table. Angela was already inwardly ready to be told what a wrong pizza she had. Hawaiian. What a pizza. Mother-in-law loved this word unpresentable, and knew how to apply it to anything. But instead, Margaret praised the dish and even took a refill. Angela felt suspicion scraping at her soul. Something will happen. And the misgiving came true, because the mother-in-law suddenly remembered that she was not empty-handed, but with a gift and, for a moment went to her room, returned with a box of chocolates. Unusual, Angela smiled politely. I took a bite of one, a delicate bitter chocolate filling with a cherry core. Carolyn's work, the mother-in-law said importantly, and Angela almost choked. Because Carolyn was the name of the first girl Valentine had married, the daughter of Margaret's best friend. The best part of the story was that the matchmaking had already taken place when Valentine and Angela were preparing for the wedding. Such a talented girl. My mother-in-law shook her hands. She's your age, by the way. She glanced at Angela. Think about it. Only 29 years old girl, and already her own business. What business? Valentin was surprised. Isn't she a manager in a travel agency? That doesn't stop her from developing her personal brand as a confectioner. Margaret put a coconut candy on a saucer for her son. She's a chocolatier and now she's making candy. All her friends, relatives and workmates order from her. Such a businesswoman Carolyn is. It's a pity that she is lonely, sighed her mother-in-law wistfully. Tell me, Angela, why is it so Why are the most intelligent, kind, homemade and beautiful girls alone, and others you know all sorts of such? And mother-in-law so demonstratively twisted her fingers into some figure in the air, as if she were sending a curse. So many of them. They get married and mess with decent men's heads. Angela really wished she could vomit from the candy she'd eaten, but instead it was delicious, and she wanted more. And she suddenly decided not to deny herself. She set her sights on the last one in the box, white chocolate-covered strawberries. I have no idea. Maybe you, as a person with a lot of personal life experience, can explain it better. I asked my mother-in-law with a smile so wide that my cheeks ached. She understood the hint and flashed her eyes. Angela, whose mood crept upward like the scale of a weather thermometer in spring, shook her slipper leg under the table to the beat of the epic melody playing in her head. Finally, dinner was over. The mother-in-law went to her room to rest from the road, and the landlady washed all the dishes and stood at the kitchen window in silence, turning out the lights so, looking at the city lights, it was easier to think about how to gain strength, so as not to start stuttering by the end of this week. Angela never cooked anything complicated in the morning before work. It was enough for her to grab a yogurt and some fruit, at most a bowl of breakfast cereal with milk. Valentine, as a man, demanded something more substantial, and that something was leftovers from last night's dinner or a sandwich with whatever was in the refrigerator. But this morning Angela got up an hour earlier to prepare a solid breakfast, just like in American movies: scrambled eggs with bacon, bean salad, pancakes, porridge, toast with cheese, cheesecakes, fruit salad. Let her mother-in-law have nothing to reproach her with. A week like that, nothing? Vaughn, I recently watched a TV series where the maids in Victorian England, in general, 3 hours of sleep, and even clean fireplaces, so she'll be all the more able to cope. Good morning. Angela smiled welcomingly at Margaret. Her mother-in-law was yawning and shuffling, squinting unhappily at the sun beating through the window. She stopped, assessed the table, and by the shadow that ran across her face, Angela realized that she had succeeded. Now it will not be possible to say about her daughter-in-law that she was lazy. It won't be possible to reproach that women used to live, feed their families, and then go to the field to plow. Wow, what's the feast in honor of? Valentin entered the kitchen and asked. He rinsed his hands and immediately began to put more and more on his plate. Don't you usually eat otherwise? My mother-in-law asked with a sly smile. Usually yes. Valentin didn't let his wife answer. You sit down. It's hot. Angela tried to keep the look. Thank you, my daughter, Margaret said in her tone. But I don't feel like it. She looked in the refrigerator. I'll have some kefir. For the first 2 days, Angela tried to be the best hostess in the city, on the planet, and in the universe. It was worth the incredible effort, of course. And also, one lie when on the second day she didn't have time to cook dinner, and decided to buy a ready-made one at the cookhouse. No. Well, what's the big deal? The dishes were quite decent, and if you put it in your own pots and pans, you wouldn't think that it's store-bought. Angela was just leaving with a full basket from the cooking counter, as on the horizon, or rather to the left on the course, at the showcase with cookies, noticed her mother-in-law. She was choosing something from sugar-free products. There was such a separate dietary shelf, and she didn't seem to notice Angela yet, or did she? And just pretended not to notice. That evening the girls sat as if on pins and needles, and it seemed that Margaret was about to make some snide remark, that someone was feeding her husband with the wrong things. But everything was normal. But then Angela decided and gave up on the stay of her mother-in-law in her house because she realized that if she was so worried, she would fail in her own work. Margaret would leave and life would go back to the way it was before, and the work would be impossible to get back. So Angela went back to her usual routine. But on the fourth day, something happened on her way home. She saw Margaret walking out the door at the kiosk where the microloan company had its office. It was strange because her mother-in-law did not recognize loans in principle and harshly, insultingly even spoke about the mental abilities of those who took them. "So, what did you forget here?" "Oh, that's the meeting." Angela smiled, flying up to her mother-in-law. "What are you doing here?" Margaret hesitated, even grabbed her purse with both hands. Her eyes were racing. "No reason, I came to find out on what terms they give out." "I'm finding out for an acquaintance." "I see," Angela said meaningfully, and of course she didn't believe a word of it. Margaret, a girl in a black skirt and white blouse, looked out of the office door. "Your application is approved. We can sign the contract." The mother-in-law hummed, coughed, and prepared to say something, but Angela interrupted her. "For how long and at what interest do you give?" The employee of the company, with a smile on duty, voiced the standard variants of the conditions and offered to go to the office because there is now a very favorable promotion. "Bring a friend." "No, we do not need such, excuse me, pumping out money. We will somehow do without you." Angela waved her away and took her mother-in-law under her elbow, leading her away. Angela, what do you need money for?" asked, a little sharper even than was the usual tone of communication with her husband's relative. "This is my personal business. You don't take microloans from a good life, and you're my husband's mom, so I have the right to know." The mother-in-law again hesitated, sighed, and then she told me everything. It turned out that today, after visiting the clinic, she noticed a stray puppy on the street. The fluffy lump was whimpering, sitting at a bus stop and clutching his leg. He was unhealthy, very thin. Margaret hastily explained that she was not in the habit of picking up everyone. How many homeless animals are there in the world? There are shelters and charitable foundations for that. But for some reason she couldn't pass by. "I took the puppy and took it to the veterinary clinic. They examined him, took a picture, and said that his paw needed treatment, and that the money should be brought in today. I've already spent mine on my own treatment." The mother-in-law looked guiltily at her sister-in-law. "The pension is not soon. My friends wouldn't lend me any money, so I decided that at least this way there would be money. You can't abandon a puppy. He's not well. And then I decided I'll take him for myself. I have a private house, he'll live in it and run around in the yard. And Tom gets bored alone. At least I'll have company." Angela couldn't believe it was her mother-in-law who was saying all this. A man of rigid, strict views, negative to anything sentimental. And the girl realized that now she could not treat her as before. "You don't need a microloan. I have money. Today was payday. That's enough." "Angela, I can't." My mother-in-law shook her head. "It's your money, your family budget." "Exactly," Angela sighed. "You are our family too. Come on. Let's go to the clinic. Let's get this puppy treated as soon and as well as possible. And also, shall we go to the pet store? He needs things: a leash, a bowl, a bed." Margaret and Angela returned home a few hours later than planned. Valentine, of course, had called both of them, but Angela had told him that there was nothing to worry about, that some important business had been delayed, and that they would explain everything as soon as they got back. And they didn't come back alone. There was a puppy in her mother-in-law's arms. He had a cast on his leg. "What is that?" Valentine asked, dumbfounded, when the little group with the uninvited, quietly squeaking guest were in the hallway. "A puppy," Angela explained. "Your mom rescued him, and I was passing by." But Valentine frowned. "He's dirty. It's still difficult to bathe him. See, he has a paw." Angela moved sternly at her husband. "And what are you? A king living in a palace. And you do not have the status of a little dirt. Don't worry, I'll clean it up. And the puppy stays while mom is visiting us." The girl finished her speech with an unexpected word and turned to her mother-in-law and smiled. "Let's give him a place near the radiator. It's the warmest place." The next few days were busy. The puppy needed a lot of care. Margaret and Angela almost argued over who would take care of him this time. Valentine pretended not to care at first, but then he too was enchanted by the small, shaggy creature of white and red coloring. But at work, Angela was not doing well, or rather there were problems with the project. The girl worked in an advertising agency and had to choose a new logo from several options for a company that produces dairy products. and if necessary to finalize it. The main thing on the logo was a goat, but as it was in its pure form, it seemed bland. Something was missing. The night before the project was due, which coincided with the day of her mother-in-law's departure, Angela sat in the kitchen until late at night, bent over the printouts of the logo. Pencils, pens, and markers were scattered nearby. She tried working with them, thinking that maybe she would think better outside of the graphic editor. But nothing was working. Can't sleep. Mother-in-law came into the kitchen for a drink of water. Yeah, sighed the girl, and then somehow unemotionally shared her misfortune. Yes, it's not easy to be an artist. I'm not an artist. I'm like deputy creative director. I do not know what this beast is, grinned mother-in-law, leaning over the drawings. But I know that when I was a girl. Then in the village we had a bad goat, very much like this one of yours. She didn't like to eat what she was given. She liked to gallop around the gardens and flower beds. Oh, we used to chase her. It was a laugh, but not to those who ate a rare variety, of course. Margaret suddenly took a pencil and drew daisy flowers on one of the logos, as if she had chewed a bouquet. Oh, I've made a mess of this, I'm sorry. You're welcome, Angela sighed. I can still print it out. But I'm going to bed now. I'll take what I have, let them take what they like, or at least fire them. But the next day it turned out something unexpected. The general director of the agency chose the logo with daisies, and praised Angela for her fresh, original approach. And this is not me, said the girl, amazed. This is my mother-in-law. Really? Smiled the director. Then tell her that it's genius. And tell her, by the way, that we need such talented people. Angela took an early leave from work that day. Her mother-in-law was leaving on an early flight. She got home in time. Her husband and mom were already in the hallway. The puppy was with Margaret, of course, and sitting in a plastic carrier. Angela hugged her mother-in-law, which surprised her, and then thanked her for her help and relayed the principal's words. That's fine. The way things have worked out. Margaret smiled embarrassedly. No, I'm retired. I've worked my ass off for my life. And this director, how old is he? 59, replied the girl. So, he's 3 years younger than me, said the mother-in-law thoughtfully. Married? No, single, replied the daughter-in-law, who didn't quite understand where the conversation was going. Mom. Valentin rounded his eyes. What are you talking about? No reason, Margaret shrugged. Your father and I were divorced 20 years ago. I raised you, son, honestly, and put you in good hands. Maybe it's time for me to get my own life together. Well, ma'am, Valentine stretched out pitifully. For some reason the idea seemed very strange to him. Why? Margaret is a very attractive woman. Angela supported her mother-in-law. Everything can be. And tell me, do you want to come to us for the winter holidays? For the second half of December. I think it's more fun with 2 families. I'd love to, dear. Margaret smiled warmly. Margaret returned to her home in the suburbs, where she was greeted by Tom. The puppy, whom she named Rex, quickly settled in. He loved walking in the garden and playing with Tom. By Christmas, Margaret arrived at Angela and Valentine's house as promised. She brought them gifts that she had knitted herself, warm scarves. Angela baked ginger cookies, decorated the house, and decorated the tree. Together they had a fun and heartwarming holiday. Margaret and Angela talked a lot and became even closer. Valentine was happy to see that his mother and wife finally found common ground. After New Year's Eve, Margaret unexpectedly called Angela and told her that she had agreed to a date with the director of her agency. They met at a coffee shop and had a conversation. It turned out they had a lot in common, a love of art and traveling. Over time, Margaret and Angela's principal began seeing each other regularly. By the end of the year, they announced their engagement. Angela and Valentine were genuinely happy for their mother and future stepfather. Their wedding took place the following spring. Now Margaret had a new family, and Angela had a beloved husband, a caring mother-in-law, and a cute puppy Rex who often visited them.